few years ago, I was watching Doctor Who, and I asked myself, where can I go to school to learn how to be a Time Lord? And I suspect a lot of people, when they watch TV, when they get into their myths, their games, they want to know where they can go to school to become a superhero. Now, part of this, I feel, is the influence of the internet. That the internet teaches all of us that not only are our dreams possible, but that arguably anything is possible. So on this basis, I started a school called the Academy of the Impossible. And the purpose of the Academy of the Impossible is to really allow people to become Time Lords, to learn how to fly, to learn how to travel through time. And it's funny that I'm able to say these things and no one's come in to try to lock me up or take me away. In fact, it speaks to the way that our relationship with society, our relationship with authority, is changing because of the internet. Now, a lot of people over the last couple of decades have made the mistake of saying that the internet's about anarchy, that the internet will overthrow all authorities. And I think that's a gross mistake, because authorities will always exist. There will always be parents, there will always be teachers, there will always be police, there will always be governments. But the question is, how do we relate to these authorities? And in that sense, I see a huge shift between what used to be an institutional authority and what's now becoming a cognitive authority. And I think I'm embodying that right now, because I actually don't have any post-secondary degree. I don't have a bachelor's degree, I don't have a master's degree, I don't yet have a doctorate, but I'm kind of hoping maybe I'll get one soon. But the point is, here I am, giving a TED Talk on a stage at a university, and almost by default, you see me as an authority. Now, it used to be 20, 30 years ago, the only people who would appear in the media were people who had institutional authority. Professors, deans, officers, doctors, ministers. These are the types of people who society put their trust in. But in today's day and age, all it takes is a tweet, and you could have global attention. In fact, anyone who wants to express themselves has the opportunity to become an authority. And the reason for this is that the cognitive authority is the individual who in our society delivers signal amidst the noise. Now, when you think about it, the metaphor of signal to noise really speaks of how media in our world works. The moment you turn on the television, the moment you turn on the radio, the moment you turn on the internet, you're going to get a lot of noise. Now, the onus is on you to tune in to that signal. I particularly like Twitter, because I find with Twitter, I can really tune that signal in so that it becomes a source of intelligence. But a lot of people get completely turned off by Twitter, because when they sign up, all they get is noise. They see it's people talking about their lunch, people talking about what socks they wore today. They say, I don't need this cacophony. It's not going to help me in my world. But instead, they don't realize you need to tune that signal in. And part of that is tapping into cognitive authorities. Now, by cognitive authorities, what I mean in general are subject experts. But let's face it, that's still a very vague and general term, because anyone could become a subject expert. An athlete, a celebrity, a professor, a lawyer, a blogger, all of these are subject experts. And in fact, the barrier to entry is zero. Anyone could go online and say, I love Minecraft, and I know a whole lot about Minecraft, and I'm going to share all this architectural knowledge with the world. And you could become a Minecraft expert. Props to Etho, and Etho plays Minecraft. And in fact, that could become your livelihood. That could become the way in which you are a teacher in the open internet. And you see, these cognitive authorities are so important because of their relationship with reality and the ability to hack reality. Because while on the one hand, our relationship with authority is changing, so too is our relationship with reality. And I'll give you two quick examples of how this is happening. The first is the most obvious, and that's the bias of digital media. The fact that we are all now addicted and obsessed with screens. Whether it's the smartphone, whether it's the tablet, the desktop, the television, if a screen is in sight, we must look. And it helps if there's something entertaining or informative on that screen, but often it doesn't matter. Now, we take for granted that our society, our educational institutions, are based on the printed page. The fact that that page is the same for all of us. The law of the land is the same because we can all look at the laws in the books and see, yes, all those laws apply to us equally. Similarly, we can look at a newspaper and see what's happening in the news and get a sense that it's part of a shared reality, that we all exist in that society. But where is the shared reality on the digital screen? Fact is, we all use our smartphones in a very unique way. Nobody has the same set of apps. Nobody has the same desktop program. Even when it comes to more static devices, increasingly thanks to cloud computing, we'll create a customized computing environment of our webmail, of our online storage. And that, too, follows us wherever we go. There isn't a newspaper. There isn't a set constitution that governs the internet. Instead, we each experience it in a very subjective way, and this has consequences, especially when it comes to innovation, especially when it comes to our use of scientific inquiry. Because think about how we all tend to use the internet, especially with regard to search. How many people actually go online to find someone who disagrees with them? How many people go online to find someone who will pierce their worldview? The traditional scientific method says you construct a hypothesis, and then you go out into the world to test that hypothesis, which does mean exposing yourself to naysayers, to haters, to critics, to those who would disagree with you. Instead, what we tend to do as a society is we seek similarity. We seek reinforcement. We go out onto the internet and we pick the pieces of information that reinforce what we want to believe, that reinforce our hypothesis without necessarily testing it. What this translates to is insularity as our dominant culture. That we retreat into the type of social circles, we retreat into the type of information sources that reinforce and narrow our worldview rather than expand it. And the irony, of course, is we have all of the world's knowledge at our fingertips. And yet instead we use it as a mirror for our narcissism. A way to find things that remind us of us and look like us and resemble us. And this is warping our sense of reality. Because all of a sudden, it's our friends who define our reality, no longer the outside so-called objective world. Maybe it's our parents, maybe it's our schools, maybe it's our workplace, maybe it's our favorite artist, our favorite athlete, our favorite religious prophet. All of these are means to customize. And you even see it when you go outside in the street, that rather than be exposed to shared reality, increasingly people plug themselves in, whether it's via earbuds or whether it's directly by plugging into the screen. Now, I am happy to say that Google will be the first company to introduce a smartphone for your face, the type of wearable computing that will allow you to watch where you're going and be able to check your email at the same time. So no more will you be plagued by that shared reality that your ancestors all experienced. No, now you can carve away your own reality. Now, all of this may sound a little facetious, but the other interesting development when it comes to our relationship with reality is physics, explicitly quantum physics. Because traditionally, physical sciences has been the domain of reality. When we think about what reality is, it's things like the force of gravity. It's things like physical forces. It's the fact that if we don't pay attention to where we're walking on the street, we'll run into each other. But in fact, what we're learning from quantum physics is that reality isn't so structured, isn't so finite. In fact, it involves a lot of probability. But in particular, there's this notion of quantum entanglement, often referred to as the observer effect. And basically what this says is that reality is impacted by your observation of it. And think of it in terms of a tweet. You might see people having a conversation, and they might be talking about a subject that's of interest to you, and you want to add your 2 cents. No longer is reality something that is just passive and broadcast to you like a television. No, reality is now something that evokes a response, that expects a response. When you hear people talking, you want to engage. When you see something on the internet, you want to speak back. Now, it's interesting that science is articulating this subjective bias as it pursues the building blocks of the universe. But the byproduct is literally the destruction of objective reality. It acknowledges that there is no reality. There's just you hearing my words, watching this video, experiencing this in the audience, and your brain is having a hallucination that says, hey, that guy's saying something interesting, I think. But the reality is there is no shared reality, except for here at school. Perhaps the last bastion of the shared reality. Perhaps the reason why 100 years from now people will still be paying tuition. Because there is still a value when it comes to innovation, when it comes to discovery, that is derived from that shared reality. But before I address that, I did sort of allude earlier to the fact that politics abhors a vacuum. That there are authorities on the internet. They may not just be the traditional authorities. And I would argue that the most authoritative element of the internet, and I say element because it's not a being, is data. It's hard to argue with data. Increasingly, data is the type of authority, the type of reality that a lot of people, just because it's not tied to a messy body, because it's not subject to hallucination, it is becoming the constitution of the internet. It is becoming that printed page by which we all agree, okay, yes, that is real. And think of the companies today that are the most valuable, that are the most talked about, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples. What are they but large data repositories, large data miners, large companies that are able to forge that reality? I suspect all of you will enter into an existential crisis in which you wonder, who am I, myself or my Facebook profile? How do people judge me? Based on who I am as a physical being or based on what they see on my Facebook? Or if you'd like a more abstract level, what people find when they Google you. In fact, one would argue that that first impression that comes from a Google search result is sadly far more powerful and authoritative than who you are as a physical human being. Now, there are problems with the authoritarianism of data. Number one of which, it's really just gazing at tea leaves. The magic ball of our era is big data. That if you have enough data, you can find whatever you want to find. And that becomes reality. Think of this as your credit score and your ability to get a mortgage, your ability to get a car. Think of this as your clout score, your social media score, your employment index. I mean, if you're a firm that's going to hire one person, 10 people, and 1,000 applicants submit, wouldn't you want software to sort through it all? If you're a graduate program, you're fairly prestigious, and you have tons of candidates, why not have software sift through all of that? The problem, of course, is that too is not a shared reality. Very few people I know can speak data. Very few people I know have the type of coding literacy to understand the reality that is being foisted upon us. And that's where, interestingly enough, there's an anti-authority on the internet called Anonymous. And Anonymous has kind of emerged as the cyber dissident, the official opposition of the new internet empire. And it's partly because of their literacy, their ability to work data, to take that data, to shed their light on reality that most of the public never gets to see. And it suggests that what they're doing is not so much hacktivism, i.e. hacking plus activism, but hacking reality. Actually debating what kind of society we live in, debating how the internet should be governed, debating how access, how copyright, how the regulations that govern our society should apply to our online networks. And it's an incredibly important political debate, of which Anonymous is certainly not the only key participant. The Pirate Bay is another group that is clearly at the forefront of hacking reality, because they certainly believe that if we have the technology to share all the world's culture, to share all the world's knowledge, we owe it to ourselves to do so. We owe it to our children and their children to make available all the knowledge, all the culture, all the understandings that as a human society we've gathered. So it really comes back down to the issue of what kind of society would we like to live in? What kind of reality would we like to live in? And interestingly enough, authority plays a central part in defining that reality. Part of it has to do with trust, how we trust information, and who we choose to trust. Now, when you look at the research around trust and how trust is formed, it's intrinsically linked to vulnerability. That the only way you can trust is to be vulnerable. And it's interesting in the context of the internet, we have two scenarios of trust. One in which you have a shared reality, in which in that shared reality, you kind of have to trust each other because you're in the same class. You're in the same family, you're in the same clan, you're in the same Battlefield 3 squad. And in that sense, you must trust each other because you depend and there is that sense of vulnerability. But if there is no shared reality, there is no vulnerability, there is no trust. And it's interesting how the culture of distrust has become the kind of default when it comes to most online environments, because there isn't that sense of shared reality. In contrast to the other arena in which we're asked to trust, and that is with regard to our data. That Facebook and Google continually, voluntarily, have so much of our data, and we are vulnerable to them. Because not only do they have that data, but they have the power to define us. They have the power to construct our identity in a way in which other people believe Google and Facebook over us when it comes to deciding who we are and who we can be. So it's almost as if we're expected to trust because of that vulnerability, and I would say no. That we should demand to see what data they have. Imagine you create every day in your online travels a digital shadow. That everything you do leaves a bit of data. And that data, once looked at in a perspective, reflects you. Your interests, your ambitions, who you are. Well, you should be able to see that shadow. To verify its accuracy at the very least. If not, perhaps, to admire it, to criticize it, to reflect upon it. But instead, these companies say, no, we're not going to let you see that data. We want you to trust us. I think that's a mistake. I think that we are in a point of our society in which, on the one hand, any of us can be authorities. Any of us can stand on this global stage and give a signal to the world. And as Anonymous and the Pirate Bay have shown, even if that signal is against conventional wisdom, even if that signal defies all the authorities, it can still resonate, be popular, and be powerful when it comes to participating in the public debate, in participating in what our society should be. Demand the impossible. Hack reality. Not just for yourself, but for your society. Because we are at an era in which innovation is immediately accessible. Any new idea can not only change the world, but reach the world. So when you're a grandparent, when you're a great-grandparent, and your great-grandchild looks at you and says, you were there when the internet came to be. What did you do to make this society better, to make it wonderful? Don't say, well, I didn't do much except watch cat videos. Hack reality. Demand the impossible. Thank you.